From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Friday, January 17th. The 2025 legislative session starts next week. Legislative leaders recently spoke to a room full of reporters, including the ones on this podcast, and lawmakers struck an optimistic tone. There was even some friendly political banter between members of the two parties. But how long will the banter last until it turns into political bickering? We'll discuss. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk Vanderhart.
And I'm OPB Politics reporter Bryce Dole.
Dirk, we have covered some eventful legislative sessions.
Yes.
There's been walkouts. We were there when Governor Kate Brown sent the cops after state lawmakers. We've covered deals made and then brazenly broken. During the 2023 long legislative session, it was very clear that the Democratic and Senate leaders did not like each other. But so far, the start of this session is feeling more mellow, for now at least.
Yes and no. I mean, I think that is unmistakably the case in the Senate, right? Thinking back to 2023, as you said, I believe even before the session started, Senator Tim Knopp, who was the Republican Senate leader at the time, put out a statement blasting the Senate President, Rob Wagner. That got off on a very bad foot, and it only got worse from there. This year, and I think really over the last year or so, we've seen a couple of things. We've seen Wagner, the Democratic Senate president, make a big effort to reach proactively out to the Republicans in the chamber, some of whom, are still very mad at him for his role in issuing unexcused absences during that 2023 walkout that then barred 10 folks from running for re-election. Wagner in 2023 would often say something anytime you asked him about his relationship with Republicans. He would say, my door is always open if they want to come talk to me. And he has come to reflect on that and sort of change that approach. Here's what he said on Monday during a session opening speech.
I've come to realize that an open door is not nearly enough. An open door is a passive action that requires someone else to make the first move. In essence, requires you to come to me. What I've learned, and even quite recently, is that I have a responsibility to go to you.
And so what he's been doing is going out around the state, visiting Republicans in their districts, getting to know them. And I have to say, it feels unquestionably like it's paid off, at least for now. We heard from Wagner and Senate Republican leader Daniel Bonham yesterday. It is very clear they're going to disagree on a lot in terms of policy and how the state accomplishes its goal. But they also seem to be making an honest effort to create a better relationship between the two parties in the Senate. Here's part of what Bonham said.
We're coming with a charm offensive. We want to get to know you. We want to go out to dinner with you. Axe throwing was mentioned in the speech. I think that's a great idea. Maybe some cornhole. Who knows? But I do think we need to get to know each other.
The speech he's talking about there is Wagner's speech on Monday, where he floated the idea of the two parties doing axe throwing. I guess cornhole's on the table now. Who knows what's next? Horseshoes, pickleball, we've heard is a thing, right?
Yeah, I think they've already played some pickleball.
We should be clear, I think, that despite all this, as I said, these are people who don't see eye to eye on plenty of things, how to carry out the policies they think are necessary. So the question, I think, is how far this good feeling gets when it comes to working out those differences and push comes to shove.
But it is noteworthy because, like you nodded to in your answer, it was the Senate that really derailed the entire legislative session during 2023. That's right. Where everything blew up. But that doesn't mean there's going to be, like you said, more partisan bickering in the Senate. And also the House had a bit of a different tone yesterday during this legislative preview.
There is never a guarantee against partisan bickering in a legislative session. And you're right, Lauren. I mean, the House has gotten along pretty well in recent sessions under their Republican and Democratic leaders. But it does not seem quite as friendly as the Senate at this point. We have a new House Republican leader in Christine Drazan, who is also, as you know, an old House Republican leader. She quit to run for governor, lost that race, now has won her seat back and immediately won the leadership spot. Drazan is pretty forceful when she feels Republicans aren't given meaningful input on policy. And we've seen her use tactics again and again to sort of exert what influence she can. Bill readings extensively in 2021. She led a walkout in 2020 over cap and trade. And I think she's in a familiar position this year. Once again, she's leading a House Republican caucus that is in a super minority. That means Democrats led by House Speaker Julie Fahey have 60% of the seats in the House chamber. Also in the Senate, they have that margin, so they can pass any bill they want without a single Republican vote, essentially. I think what we see from Drazen is she's going to focus on messaging what she sees as major failures by the Democratic Party. She doesn't have any other levers to pull in terms of stopping them from passing bills they want, but she can tell the people of Oregon again and again that the way the Democrats are steering the ship is leading us to a very bad part of the ocean. I mean, here's an example from yesterday when Drazen, as she often does, sort of went off on the issue of homelessness.
That is not something to celebrate. With the billions of dollars and the 2 going on 3 years of a state of emergency around homelessness, where's the results? Where is it that we can look at that and say that that money has actually achieved enough of an impact given the scope and scale of how much we've invested? We've invested billions, and we have succeeded in housing a few thousand.
I think you can count on hearing a lot more stuff like that during the session. We heard from the House yesterday very optimistically, both parties, saying, well, we agree on the big picture. We agree on the main issues, but it became extremely clear that they have very little common ground, it felt like, on how to achieve those things. So, TBD how it all goes.
Well, we certainly know one of the big fights will be around the transportation package. Bridges in the state are literally falling down. Potholes are growing. The state's infrastructure is crumbling. Bryce, we know Republicans are bracing for new taxes. They have suggested we should tap the general fund instead of raising new revenue. The governor made it clear yesterday that that is basically a non-starter. Break it down for us.
Right. So we've talked about this on the show before, but the short version is that lawmakers are trying to figure out how to fund our transportation system differently and fill really big budget shortfalls that are facing agencies like the Oregon Department of Transportation, county road departments, the people who basically keep our infrastructure stable and healthy. Right now, this system is funded by grants and property taxes, but mainly it's funded by what's called the State Highway Fund. And just to recap, that includes fees that people pay at the DMV, taxes that are levied on heavy trucks, and the gas that people buy at the pump regularly. But now lawmakers are really trying to figure out how to generate revenue to keep up with rising costs of construction that have risen, in part due to inflation. And basically, agency budgets, they're just not keeping pace with those costs. So the state's taxes aren't indexed to adjust for inflation. And right now, more Oregonians are, they're buying electric vehicles and fuel-efficient vehicles that don't chip in on the gas tax. So there's really big questions as to the future and how this will all be funded. And like you said, it's not exactly clear yet precisely how lawmakers plan to fill this hole. And, it's seeming like, the Democrats yesterday gave a pretty good sign, fees and different taxes are likely. Other people have mentioned shifting away from the gas tax and shifting towards something like taxing people per mile that they drive. And obviously, Republicans are opposing the idea of new taxes because a lot of their constituents, so many people in Oregon right now, are facing the rising cost of living and the rising cost of housing. Republican leaders like Representative Drazen and Senator Bonham were pretty critical yesterday as well about the Oregon Department of Transportation itself and how it has been using its money to maintain its roads and bridges in recent years, and how it's been tackling really big infrastructure projects that have been kind of some of the state's biggest goals since the last infrastructure package passed in 2017. So, Senator Bonham suggested using, like you said, using the state's general fund to fund this system. But Governor Kotek and Senate President Rob Wagner, they each kind of signaled not interested in that idea. And so, look, this will be a really difficult package politically, obviously, because both parties acknowledged, a lot of Oregonians, they're struggling with that rising cost of living. And it's hard to believe that a lot of them are going to be enthusiastic about new taxes and fees. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plans out.
And just to put a finer point on it, I mean, like we said, Democrats have those 3/5 supermajorities. If they get behind a taxing or fee mechanism that they like, they can put it forward unilaterally. Republicans have said, we don't want any piece of that at this point. Now, whether that changes, we have, as Bryce said, no idea what a package looks like, so it's hard to say who stands on what side. But definitely the two parties forming up on different sides of this.
Along with the transportation package, I think the other marquee issue we have clarity about right now is wildfire funding. We have all obviously been thinking of fires lately with everything that's happened in California, but Oregon also had its most expensive wildfire season in modern times this year. It was so expensive, the state couldn't even pay the people who helped us fight the fires initially.
That's right. So back in December, the legislature convened for a short session to address this issue, trying to, resolve what was the most expensive year for Oregon in terms of wildfires on record. They passed one bill during this short session, allocating about $218 million to cover the cost of these fires that, there's nearly 2 million acres that burn. So it was a really, really big fire year. And that money is intended to free up, the Oregon Department of Forestry, the state fire marshal to pay those contractors who had been kind of saddled in recent months with the fact that they hadn't been paid for the machinery and the firefighters that they sent out this year.
Here's the thing about this. We know that this is going to be a discussion this year. It's been a discussion for, I think, the last decade. There have been various proposals and people really running around saying we need to look at this. There was a work group recently that came together to try to hammer out possibilities for finding a more sustainable source of money to both, prevent and fight wildfires. Right now, a lot of this money comes from the state's general fund, which means it's up against every other big priority the state has. And I just think the jury is still out about whether we find a good option. The governor has suggested not any sort of tax or fee increase or any funding source. She suggested, let's hold back $150 million that we would otherwise put in the rainy day fund and pay for our next fire season. And by the way, lawmakers, I think you need another $130 million a year for this. She's not offering any suggestions on how we do it. She said yesterday she's about to look over the recommendations that have been made with her staff. So she's clearly not super weighed in on this. I just think you're right, Lauren. We have clarity that this is going to be a focus. I don't think I feel like I have a ton of clarity that it's something that's we're ultimately going to find a great answer to, but maybe this is the year.
I think she suggested calling it the Smoky Day Fund instead of the Rainy Day Fund, which is really depressing. But okay, the biggest reason lawmakers are going to be in Salem this session is because they have to pass the next 2-year budget. I mean, despite the many bills that they suggest and all the policy ideas they have, their paramount duty here really is to fund the state schools and prisons and create new beds for addiction treatments and mental health.
Yep.
Remind us a little bit about the budget framework we're working with.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Oregon is in a comparatively good place here. We are watching our neighbors in Washington trying to close a budget hole that is in the billions. They're trying to figure out where they can cut, where they can raise taxes to close that hole. It looks like Oregon has enough money to pay for many of the current services and then some. That's if you don't count these big questions of wildfire and transportation that we've been talking about. But the general fund that Governor Kotek proposed on December 1st is actually 17% above the current one. So there is money, we are told, to pay for a lot of our priorities. Even so, though, I mean, Kotek called her budget a stability budget. She's saying to lawmakers, really, we need to keep funding these key priorities I've made. Like you said, Lauren, it's schools, it's behavioral health, it's housing and homelessness. We have come to expect from Kotek, both when she was the House Speaker, now when she's governor, she's always going to push for a lot of money for housing, a lot of money for homelessness. Here's part of what she said yesterday.
I have heard from some legislators who are like, your homelessness package is quite large. And I'm like, yes, because we're in a crisis and it is improving, but we need to stay the course. If I had more dollars, or if the federal government wanted to give us more money for rent assistance, I would know where to spend it.
This is something you hear Republicans knock Kotek for again and again, that she just wants to throw money at this problem. She is throwing money at the problem, and we're not having enough success. You heard Drazen say that earlier. Some caveats to all this. I mean, the governor's budget is a starting point. It's really up to her to make the case to legislative Democrats that her priorities are the right ones. And we also don't actually know how much money we have. We won't have the clearest picture of how much the legislature can spend until we get the final revenue forecast they'll use to set a budget. I think that comes in May. In any session, the budget is sort of the final big thing that happens, and so we won't expect a ton of attention on that for a couple months.
One thing both parties seemed to agree on yesterday during the legislative preview was that they want to see more legislative oversight of state agencies. And I found that a little interesting as someone who covers the Oregon Department of Human Services, because there is perhaps no greater lawmaker watchdog over a state agency than Senator Sarah Gelser-Bluen, the Democrat from Corvallis. And her willingness to take on that role is often met with criticism and not praise. So that is one thing I'm going to be on the lookout for, either cultural shifts or bills that might address that issue. But there are a lot of bills, hundreds, thousands of bills. What other noteworthy ones are you all watching in these very early days?
I think what I'm really interested in seeing is if any of the housing legislation is meaningfully different than what has been passed in the past. Basically, we heard from Governor Kotek yesterday talking about like the need, and this week at her State of the State, about the need to stay the course, and that her policies are working and are starting to make progress. And clearly, there was some disagreement between Fahey and Drazen about this. But I mean, right now there's 2,300 eviction cases being filed every single month in Oregon, and so the notion that we're not. I think each party would agree that Oregon is in a hard position when it comes to housing. So I'm really curious to see if any of this legislation tries to do something different that we haven't been doing in recent years.
It is always really hard to know at this point in the session which bills are going to have legs, which will just sort of get ignored. There are 2,200, 2,300 bills that have been filed so far. I've been trying to go through them. I got through a big chunk. Here's some things that I want to keep track of. Civil commitment. I think that is one of the most interesting discussions we will have this session. The question of how and whether we should lower the threshold for sort of forcibly helping people who are in mental health crisis. It's been something lawmakers have talked about for years. It feels like there's a lot of momentum this time around. The governor even said yesterday she supports at least the broad strokes of one of the bills that are out there. So big one there. Drugs. We recriminalized drugs last year, small possession of drugs. Lawmakers are almost certainly going to make tweaks to that system that was created. How do they do that? We've already seen some bills that would sort of strengthen penalties for fentanyl possession. I don't know if those have legs. Again, it's hard to tell, but that's something that's out there. There will be some attempts to rein in flavored tobacco and vaping. I saw a minor in possession of vaping material bill, I think, out there. People are really putting a lot of attention on that. Guns will be a big deal. There are at least 3 bills that I've seen. Those are always, hotly contested bills if they come up. And then just, weird bills. There was a bill that I saw outlawing the purposeful release of balloons into the atmosphere. Presumably that's a climate change thing, but that would become a crime.
Second graders all over the state are crying.
Right, exactly. Daylight savings might be another one. We can't get rid of that. There's another bill, at least one that I saw. And are we going to see some meaningful reaction to some of the voter registration problems we saw? Republicans certainly want to make that an issue. Democrats can ignore it if they want, but we'll see if they take something up.
So as we've covered, yesterday, the governor and all the legislative leaders spoke to us, and Senate President Rob Wagner was asked if he thought there was something that would blow the session up.
Right.
Not surprisingly, he said no. And as we have covered, the Republican leader, Daniel Bonham, was also very friendly in his response. But at the same time, he wouldn't say that there wouldn't be blow-ups, essentially. He had this quip about how he felt like the governor spent more time talking about her track career in the state of the state than on the transportation package. And that's clearly something that he is worried about, that there's not a lot of details to this transportation package other than Democrats have signaled, that they're going to raise taxes, which Republicans, there's not much more that they hate than raising taxes.
Yep. I mean, exactly. As we said, there's no guarantee against anything. There is not a clear flashpoint right now that will lead to a major disruption. I think in the most fraught years we've had, typically at the outset of session, there have been these glimmers of issues that were maybe going to be a very big deal. We're just not seeing it. I mean, it is true that Democrats and Republicans disagree on how to fund transportation. I don't think we heard from Bonham or Drazen yesterday, or when I talked to them earlier this week, that they would be willing to walk away if Democrats do want to raise taxes on that. But Dems are are really in the driver's seat on this session. And I think, the party showed some purposeful restraint during last year's short session, sort of declining to move the kinds of bills they knew would prompt a huge fight after we had that debacle in 2023. And the question is, now that we have another long session, whether they will try to avoid that again, or whether they want to try to move the ball on issues like I mentioned, gun control, that many care a lot about but are certain in Salem to produce a fight. I asked Wagner specifically yesterday, actually, about whether his caucus planned to pursue gun bills. He essentially said he didn't know. Okay. But, Lauren, as you know, 5 months is a very long time when the legislative session is concerned. So buckle up.
Buckle up. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
This week's episode was produced by Andrew Thien. Our audio engineer is Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. A few episodes ago, we started asking for your questions, and we are excited to say that you delivered. And we would love more. So if you have questions about the session or anything on your mind in Oregon and Southwest Washington politics, shoot us a line at OPB Politics Now at opb.org. We appreciate it. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.